That was perfect. Thank you, Lauren. That was really inspiring. I think I definitely took away sort of by working together, we can solve it, and the importance that CVCs can bring to scale up the opportunity, not just in the mitigation, but the adaptation as well. So I think it's really sort of powerful to hear on the opportunity that we can bring around security. And next, we're going to talk a little bit more on detail about this. So we're going to have a panel talking about the invest or innovate. Can we do both? Question. This is taking a lens on corporate strategies behind ESG, or environmental, social, and governance factors. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage as moderator, Mark Gallagher, Head of Corporate Venture Capital at SVB Financial Group, Silicon Valley Bank. Mark, welcome back. Nice to have you over from Boston. How are you, sir?
Good. Good morning. Good morning to you, and thank you again for hosting such a great event. And last night was spectacular. Can't think of many. Can't think of a greater or better venue, so thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you all for being here. I want to bring up the panel. I'm going to do less of the talking. Hopefully, they're going to do more of the talking to talk about the topic. So we'll have Gen, Alex, Suzanna, and James come on up and grab a few seats. I don't know if I should sit in the middle.
How should we sit?
Wherever you want.
Okay.
Preferably on the stage, however.
You go on, go over there then.
Perfect.
Sure.
I can see that. How much time are you giving me? Half an hour. Perfect. Everyone doing well?
I behaved last night.
I'm not sure if I did. Everyone had a good evening last night?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Fabulous.
It was fabulous. So with me, I've got Gen from Sony Corporate Venture. I've got Alex, who is with InMotion, which is Jaguar Land Rover. I've got Suzanna Chiu from Amadeus. Amadeus is in the travel space. We'll talk about that in a sec. And James Bruegger, Chief Investment Officer of Seraphim Space. That's a multi-corporate fund. So we've got a very wide variety of folks to talk about the topic at hand. And I think in our prep calls, we went through the concept of investor, innovate, can we do both? And I think it's fair to say, of course we can do both. Anyone disagree with that concept? In fact, it's probably even broader, right? We can probably invest, innovate, acquire, et cetera, right? So there's many facets of ways of tackling innovation within corporations. So I think the thrust of the conversation probably is around the ESG topic. And we've heard some amazing speakers over the last day and a half talk about not just the problem at hand and the scale of the problem at hand when it comes to environmental, social governance, but also the urgency that is required to act. And the intent of this panel is to talk a little bit more about the tactics and how some of the leading corporations in the space are going about addressing some of the ideas we saw around the COP discussion. So let me start with cars, because that's a pretty easy one to go to. Not known for being environmentally friendly. Let's all admit that. And I think, Alex, to put you on the spot immediately, of course, most of the innovation in vehicles since probably the 70s has been around reducing emissions marginally and maybe increasing safety. Thank you. We all appreciate that. But it's really been incremental innovation over many, many years. There's been very little revolutionary innovation until our friend Elon Musk and Tesla came along. And suddenly the notion of electric cars became fashionable. Talk to us a little bit, and I know you were actually involved in the development of electric vehicles within Jaguar, but talk to us a little bit about InMotion's view on how to radically innovate and change the car industry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as you say, cars in general have never been particularly environmentally friendly, but Jaguar Land Rover vehicles especially, I think, and a lot of the IP in JLR has also been very much around the engine. And I think for a long time, really, automotive manufacturers in general were really just following whatever the regulators put to them in terms of their needs to get EVs out. And I think it's been a real shift now in the last few years. where all of a sudden there was an advantage to being a leader in the electric vehicle space, to not only meet the ESG targets that regulators are putting on, but also to really understand the sort of the future market available. And no longer does a vehicle operate entirely as its own isolated piece of metal, but you have to be a part of an ecosystem to deliver a successful EV. The JLR I-Pace came out 3 or 4 years ago, but really as a contract manufactured piece of kit with very little support system around it, to the point where even dealers were struggling to recommend it to their customers. Whereas actually when you've got charging networks, charging and energy capabilities, you've got battery technologies which need to be developed, where very few OEMs have any expertise of that in-house or any scaled expertise of that in-house. And then the circular economy piece, the supply chain and the end of life of the battery. All of these are areas where we're seeing innovation coming from startups. And now sustainability in ESG has moved from being a horizontal for InMotion Ventures in terms of a criteria we look for in all of our investments, but also now as a vertical, where companies are really helping JLR and the automotive industry fulfill those sort of future ambitions for scale.
Let me talk a little bit more, excuse me, about the concept of the circular economy. It affects all of you, right? It affects all of us. How are you thinking about investment in the retrieval part or the recycling part of end of life? Obviously, we know lithium, cobalt, all these things have been extracted in great volumes, in many cases from countries that don't have great environmental records, et cetera, or social records for that matter. So how are you thinking about the circular economy element, and how much are you investing in that space?
Yeah, I think it's critical, and I think it's probably our highest priority in that space. I think it was only last week that it was announced that that EVs surpassed smartphones as being the biggest consumer of cobalt now in applications. And EVs are scheduled to go up 10x in the next 7 years. And there's regulations again of increasing the amount of recycled material into batteries, but it's fundamentally not enough to manage the problems we're already seeing in the supply chain globally. We've got an investment alongside TDK Ventures actually in a company called Ascend Elements on that battery recycling, not only producing the raw materials, but producing active cathode material straight for use by manufacturer specifications into batteries from second-hand batteries. It's an area where we're looking forward not only to investing in Ascend Elements, but to really build that partnership with the corporate and really to help JLR's strategy in the battery space as well there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Again, in our prep conversation, you identified for me that Sony, according to the Wall Street Journal, is the most sustainable company in the world. That's a pretty big title.
That's probably too big a title.
That's how have you done it? But touching a little bit on that circular economy concept, where are you deploying capital? Where are you focused on the ESG part of the paradigm?
So I guess my general comment there would be that ESG, you shouldn't really rush, take it slow. It's a sort of multi-year process. So we got into this, got back into corporate venturing in 2016, and so then we got called in by lots of different people, like for instance, like Hiro Mizuno, who ran the biggest investment fund in Japan, and now is known for being the outside director of Tesla. He's a big ESG proponent, and he called us in and he said, "Again, if you're going to run a fund for Sony, a venture fund for Sony, it has to be ESG." And we didn't say yes or no. We went back because we only had 3 pieces of paper describing what we were going to do, and we really had no one to do it. That was where we were. But over time, we realized that many of the companies we are trying to invest have a very ESG mindset. And we started feeling comfortable with putting that into the criteria. We started our environmental fund, an impact fund, as a sub-fund 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And last year, we put in ESG principles into all our investments so that ESG would be a major pillar in terms of making the investment decisions. And so it's something that we've taken time to do, 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I see, some people come up to me and says, hey, how should I do ESG right now? And I says, please, it's probably good that you take time, talk with the corporate, really understand what the company is trying to do, and really try to align there.
Yeah. And then there's always the question, how do you measure the outcome, right?
And measurement is, as the more we work on it, it's not that easy. And so, for instance, like if you have stimulants related to agriculture, the short-term result may be that you're using less fertilizer, less water, so it should be good. But if you talk to more of the people who are looking long-term, who are looking more like biodiversity and who are critical about how agriculture is done right now, saying that, oh, no, if you do that, that's going to slow the shift into a more biodiverse farming. So it's not easy. There's a community, yes, what you're probably trying to do is right as a logic, but will it be accepted by the community is something I think that needs additional work.
Yeah. Community is a good one. Suzanna, you and Amadeus are a key part of the travel industry, by and large, right? Working with over 200 airlines, 10,000, I think, hotels.
Yeah,
Ish.
more than that, yes.
Maybe 20,000?
Yes.
There you go. So, travel is critical to all of us from a business standpoint, from a tourism standpoint. Airlines are, again, not known to be clean and green. As a provider to the airline industry, to the travel industry, what elements of the community are responsible for reducing emissions?
Absolutely. Thanks for the explanation and the introduction already. So for Amadeus, it's given that we are a technology provider. Like for the industry, we work with airlines, airports, hotels, insurance, travel insurance companies, car rentals. So we touches on almost every aspect of the travel ecosystem. So coming back to Amadeus ourselves, we've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for the last 9 years. So in a way, the thinking of sustainability, it is quite ingrained within the company. With the pandemic, the entire industry, we had an opportunity to take a pause and have a think, how do we want to have the recovery in a better way? Not just collectively to say, so how can we do things better when volume comes back? And that was last year when IATA, so the International Association of the Airlines, announced the program of Fly Net Zero. So it's looking at holistically, travel, the biggest source of emissions is very openly and transparently, it's airlines. And from that perspective, how can we enable human connection, but in a greener way? No? And within that proposal, there are 4 main ways of reducing, actually achieving net zero emissions. The biggest part of it is about sustainable aviation fuel. This is at the end, this is the most direct way of reducing emission. And then we look at how can we introduce new technology. Is it about hydrogen plane? Is it about electric planes? How can we change the operations of the airports, of the airlines, to be able to maybe not use both engines when we are doing taxiing at the airport, things like that. No? And last but not least, offsetting. So on things that you cannot change immediately, so are there ways that we can already act on it? And across all these 4 topics, as you can see, every single one involves efforts of a different mini ecosystems and stakeholders, from the energy sector, from the aerospace sector, and so on and so forth. From Amadeus' standpoint, this is where we sit within that value chain. We are sitting at the search and book process. This is within this ecosystem. And for us, the question is, how can we introduce transparencies into the process such that travelers make conscious choices? Right? It's about so what options do you have, from going to go from A to B? Like, would you be like taking the train? Would you be taking the plane? What other options are there? Like, just to be able to like get that thinking process, no, just, into our every single booking journey. We work with corporations, as a corporate travel, as we all do, as part of our job. Is it about incentivizing employees? Is it to be able to make the right choices? So yeah, let's say there are many different like aspects of it. Like it involves internal development, definitely. So how can we make our products, the products that we provide to airlines to help them with the operations side of things? How can we work with carbon offsetting partners? Is definitely not the part of the value chain that we play as a technology provider. So yeah, it takes a village. So to sum it up.
It takes a village. Can you give us some examples of either investments you have done or investments you've looked at
Yes.
to try and evidence kind of how you're supporting the industry?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we are closing an investment right now on the topic of carbon offsetting. So looking at how can we introduce the element of giving a very easy way for air travelers to be able to offset their carbon footprint of air travel. No? So it's right at the booking path. You buy a ticket, here is like the extra €3, £5, £2, like to be able to offset your carbon footprint. Or to say one step further is maybe even making a contribution to SAF, to sustainable aviation fuel. You want to like compensate your part of the fuel consumption with a more sustainable option. So we're introducing more and more options along that booking path to be able to enable that. This is a sustainable concept in travel.
Do you work with and co-invest with other corporates in the space?
Totally. The investment that I just mentioned, I'm actually co-investing with one of the colleagues that were here yesterday. I haven't seen them today, but yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So, James, you're, investing in the final frontier space, very exciting, and an area of great innovation for many, many years, but most of it has been through nation-state investing, right? Not private investing. How do you think about the work that private space is doing to kind of open up that final frontier, but also to think about how its footprint is impacting not just obviously this world, but perhaps other worlds?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, back to one of your opening remarks, innovation is happening everywhere in the space sector. It's happening from the large primes, some of whom are investors in some of our vehicles. But fundamentally, there's been a paradigm shift in the space sector over the last decade. It's why some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, the likes of Elon and Bezos and Branson, have plowed so much money into the sector. The reason for that is because you've seen a 100-fold decrease in the cost of accessing space through reusable rockets and SpaceX, and now actually repurposing commercial off-the-shelf componentry for smartphones and building shoebox-sized satellites that cost less than $100,000. Rewind 10 years, satellites were the size of a bus and might cost $1 billion. So for the first time, you're seeing now the ability to put up constellations of hundreds or even thousands of satellites that are really now beginning to deliver a data and connectivity tsunami. So being able to monitor every square meter of the planet in close to real time, that sort of fidelity and is really an incredibly impactful data set if we're thinking about combating climate change, for example. If we're thinking about the ability to enable anyone around the world to connect, it's only from space that you're able to do this. So we feel very firmly that space is very much at the forefront of all things ESG. But you're absolutely right. There are considerations of if you're putting up large numbers of satellites, to be good custodians of space. And just like there needs to be accountability here on Earth for anyone who's producing stuff, the throwaway culture of space is not something that can persist. All of our everyday lives rely upon the data and connectivity that's delivered from space, be that Google Maps that I use to get here, Uber that I hopefully use to get back to the office, and everything in between. So ensuring that space is a sustainable environment and holding companies to account that are putting things into orbit and ensuring that they're minimizing their carbon footprint if you're thinking about launch. And absolutely in terms of the circular economy, as much as it might sound like science fiction, we're going to see in the next few years the ability to service satellites in orbit and ultimately potentially repurpose them for future missions.
So again, thinking about tangible examples where you're looking for investment or have done investments to kind of bring this to life for us, what have been a number of things you've looked at or invested in lately?
Yeah, so I mean, with a particular sustainability slant, actually every single one of the investments we've made now, 23, is addressing at least one of the UN SDG goals, and every single one of the SDG goals is addressed by one of our portfolio companies. So ESG is very much at the center of our approach. It's a condition for any business that we invest in. So just to highlight two or three. So we recently invested in a Japanese business called Astroscale, which was identified as one of the world's most innovative companies. They are really the first private company that's focusing on the issue of sustainability in space, looking to go and service satellites, remove space junk. These are big existential problems. So that's a recent example. Another one would be a business called ISI, a Finnish business that is putting up satellites that use radars to see through clouds and be able to image Earth. The problem with normal cameras is it's dark 50% of the time, and it's cloudy even more, so you can't reliably image. So what are the kind of use cases that come out the back of being able to look at Earth reliably anywhere in any hour of the day? Well, I'll give you two prime examples. One, ISI works with the Brazilian government to be able to monitor illegal deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. Surprisingly, rainforests are pretty cloudy a lot of the time, so it's only with this sort of data that you can actually monitor what's going on the ground. And two, given the Ukraine crisis, that we found the sort of data sets that ISI is developing are absolutely fundamental, both in terms of supporting Ukrainian forces in resisting the aggression, but also actually in terms of holding Russia to account for the atrocities that we've all seen in places like Bruegger. So it's not just the E of ESG, I think it's E, S, and G for many of our businesses. Yeah,
no, that's a great call out. So you have many corporate LPs. Again, you have a number of corporate LPs as well. How do you measure, track, evidence progress on the E, S, and G part, as well as obviously the financial returns and the other elements of disruptive investing?
Well, I mean, I think there's also a let's face it discussion that many of the startups. So you go to them and within your 40-50 questionnaire, you ask, "What's your carbon footprint?" And you get an answer saying, "I only have 7 people in my company." And so, okay, but do you have the will to think about these? And this is of course. And as the company grows, of course we will start to measure it as needed, and then of course it's not about the immediate numbers that come associated with it, but it's the do they have the momentum? Do they have the spirit? And so I think that's a fact for many of the Series A type of companies that we deal with. Of course, when it gets to companies like we invest in a company called Delos. It's a New York company, and it's trying to build a more livable hotel room. It's bringing in, making the offices and the air in the offices cleaner, and they're working with Mayo Clinic to build standards and build technology. And so for them, they have very clear-cut numbers that we can track, and of course we try to aggregate that. But as you know, all the companies have different measurement, and of course. If you're more focused on a specific industry, that could be easier, but we're in very diverse industries. Yeah. So pulling that together is something of a continuous work, I think.
Let me ask it another way. James, I'll go to you. Do you report out to your LPs your E, S, and G impact or not?
We will be. So our latest fund was actually a listed fund that IPO'd on the London Stock Exchange in July. So we've invested a lot of time in the last 9 months on implementing an appropriate ESG policy, both for the fund and for our portfolio companies. So yes, we will certainly be reporting on it. Just a general observation. I think one of the challenges with early stage companies is measurability, right? You can have great policies, but actually your ability to measure things in a way that are meaningful and report that, I think that's a big challenge for many businesses.
Well, I think to Gen's point, right, a Series A company with 7 people, it's the law of small numbers, right? In aggregate, the dollars you're investing in, the industries you sit in, is kind of the law of large numbers, right? And which one ends up being credible. Suzanna, again, thinking about some of your stakeholders, they have their own ESG type measurements, goals, annual report stuff. It's becoming more and more prevalent in financial results. Are you reporting kind of your impact or your piece of the pie?
Absolutely. So I mentioned that we've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, so that exercise is a yearly long questionnaire feeling, and that involves the entire company almost, is to report like a lot of different aspects of sustainability. So not only on the environmental side of it, but also just into like the innovations and quite a few others. So that's something that we do on an annual basis for ourselves. As an industry, I think like on the measurement side of things, the interesting part is what is an accurate calculator like for transport, for travel. And there is a constant debate, not to say should we be using averages? How accurate should you be? Because like, if we need to go down to the very, very accurate, the granular level, like then we need to look at the load factor of the plane. Are you flying business class? Are you flying economy? And so all these different types of factors, no? So is it a new aircraft? Is it an older aircraft? So it's really coming back down to like one single number for each and every passenger. So that granularity can actually go quite deep. And I think overall the direction is yes, it's like there is a lot of interest into like getting that level of granularity. Like, because it once again comes back to the transparencies and being able to make an educated or informed choice in making that travel decisions. And then we need to work on the hotel side of things and the car rental side of things in such that we can actually stitch together the end-to-end journey to be able to see the overall impact. But at the end, the biggest part of it is still around flight.
Alex, in your case, let me ask it a different way. When you make an investment, when you go to your investment committee or you prepare an investment memo, is there a paragraph in there that discusses knock-on effects or impacts or the social elements or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Only that we really started to put in the last year or so. But I think that's where we put most of the emphasis, is to really understand that when we make an investment, that our ESG values are aligned with the companies that we're investing in. And we sort of look at it on two degrees. One, that their activities are ESG aligned with our values. And then the second degree is their activities directly impact JLR's ability to meet its ESG goals, right? There's the two aspects there. And I think from that point on, our responsibility is very much maintaining that ESG awareness at the board level of the company, as opposed to sort of putting reporting requirements on them, right? And I think that's, for us, the most important thing there. I think, as Gen said, do that as the company matures and have it at the core of what they believe in, and then they will start reporting it.
Yeah.
And I think equally it becomes important, especially for our seed investments, that they are prepared for Series A investors coming in who also need it as a condition of their IC. And I think that's when actually it starts to bring value to both parties, rather than just being, like a government grant program with some atrocious reporting requirements, or just tripling the size of our DD checklist at the start of the size of investment. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a couple of minutes left. If anyone from the audience wants to ask a question of this panel, I can keep going, certainly. Nope.
I got a quick one to add.
You got a question for me?
No, I got a quick one to add.
You can ask me a question.
Well, the grand view of the Silicon Valley Bank is something I think will have a different session. It can create a different session for GCP,
Correct,
I think.
correct.
So I think maybe one thing to add is that, it's, the long question, the 50 questions that we may ask and whatnot, that's also one of the steps. But ESG has really creeped into our thinking.
Yes.
And so, like, one example is that, like, micromobility, is a safe, practical alternative. But it's also true that we see lots of scooters stranded in the streets. And that's probably not ESG. So we invested in a company called Super Pedestrian, Boston-based company.
Boston-based company, yes, I know them.
And who's really keen on solving that issue and working with the cities and the community to make more of a clean. So that's immediate impact, and that we thought that was very meaningful. Another company is that, so we sell lots of big boxes. So it's, alternative to styrofoam is obviously something that we can implement in a relatively short time. As you know, if you go deep in here, you can use mushrooms. There's lots of things you can use. But we invested in a company called Cruise Foam, which uses seashells. And you would be surprised, when we go into that discussion, people immediately ask us, well, do you really have enough supply? You would be surprised how much supply of seashells exists in the world. And so they're making organic styrofoam with good quality, and so it's actually pretty usable. So it's something that will come out with impact on a relatively short time frame.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. And I actually want to thank you for your focus on ESG while investing, and continue to keep up the good work. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.